Above is listed the tools you're going to need to remove the front bumper. The process is the same on both sides, so I'm just illustrating on one side. Use an 8mm to remove the perimeter of the inner wheel well. And store them in a Ziploc bag. Use some kind of flat item and remove the access panel. Pull back the wheel well and exposing the bracket. That will have two 8mm nuts in there, or hex heads. You're going to need a universal socket to reach the back one and remove both of those. Repeat the process on both sides. And now the bumper is detached from the front panel. Now you're going to go underneath the bumper along the perimeter and remove the 8mm fasteners that also hold the under tray. At the same time, you can remove the under tray at this point as well. Just go along the perimeter, removing those. Go along the underbelly, remove all. Just giving you a quick glimpse of what it looks like and the location of the fasteners. Store the fasteners for reinstall. Take a T30 and you're going to remove the 4 Torx bolts heads along the perimeter. Note that this rubber grommet behind and above the kidneys needs to be detached as well, because it is also holding the bumper to be detached. I label and put all my hardware in a bag. T25 to remove this snorkel. Again, storing the hardware in a Ziploc labeled bag. At that point, you're ready to remove the bumper. I am removing the bumper because I am installing a new AC condenser, radiator, and an intercooler. You do not have to do this step. Note that these fog lights need to be removed. Just a simple electrical connection, remove, and then the bumper should come free. Next, moving on to the intercooler, remove these C-clips. Now, whether you have your intercooler will vary. I had a 5-inch stepped intercooler prior to this uninstall, so again, process the same. So you're just removing the C-clamps on the 2 charge pipes. And I have a little bit of oil. It's not good. For my fasteners, my aftermarket, it's a 12mm socket, so I'm going to go ahead and remove both sides of my studs, and then I'll drop the intercooler. Drain the coolant. And to help remove it, you're going to go up top once this little screw is removed, and if you open up the coolant reservoir, it'll allow the flow to So once it's drained, you can remove this feed tube and unplug the AC fan electrical connector. You're going to need a T27 to remove the one nut on the passenger side or the exhaust side of the AC fan holding it in place. All right, now there's a clamp on the charge pipe that's going to need to be removed. So just go ahead and ensure that you pry back, clearing this grommet over the AC fan, for that way you can easily pull it out. Otherwise, it'll be just stuck in place. Removing this line will facilitate this a little easier. This is also the line that you're going to need to cut for the coolant bottle relocation. Remove the AC fan. Watch, there's some wires there. You don't want to clip any of them. So as I just mentioned, just ensure that rubber grommet is cleared on the charge pipe. At this point, I'm removing any intake that you may have. I clearly have the DCIs, but if you have a stock box, remove that at this point. Definitely going to be glad to get rid of these inlets. Go ahead and remove the first portion of the hot side, which is going to be the vacuum canisters. So there's vacuum lines attaching from the boost solenoids to these canisters, top and bottom. Remove both of those. Then you have 10mm fasteners for both the vacuum canisters and the coolant reservoir. So we're going to go ahead and prep and remove both of these. Do note that you're going to need to transition to an extension with the universal joint just for obviously flexibility, and get the ones on the bottom. There's one. I'm using the gun just to make it a little bit faster. It's pretty small screws, and then there's going to be one in line with the midline of the vacuum canister, as you can see there. Remove it. If you're doing a twin turbo setup, you can save it off to the side, but I don't need it, so I'm discarding it. Okay, next we're going to address the coolant bottle. This is the line or electrical connector that needs to be snipped and soldered and run to the driver's side of the car. This is also the hose that needs to be cut and extended to the driver's side of the car for the coolant reservoir relocation. So currently we have 3 items that need to be relocated. This hose that's going to be cut, as you see, the electrical connector, and then the hose running from the passenger side, or the upper radiator hose, to the coolant reservoir. That'll all be transitioned to roughly where the power steering reservoir is. Take a T60, just any note on this, ensure that it is fully seated and there's no slag. Turn clockwise and pull off your belt. As you notice, I have a decent amount of oil. I had a front main seal leak, which we'll be replacing as well. Insert the tow hook at the top of the engine. We're getting ready to put the mount as well as remove the steering knuckle. So rotate the steering wheel until you can see this E11 bolt and go ahead and fully remove it at this point. You can see the knuckle that attaches to the top portion of the steering rack. That's where it's located. It's the E11 as mentioned. Ensure that your steering wheel is back to top dead center and fully aligned before you do anything here. Before removing it, reinspect. At this point, I'm using a Harbor Freight engine brace. For the price, you can't beat it. Alright, just ensure that it's leveled and on something strong. Alright. It's pretty easy, just, this isn't safety concern. So here, the secondary one, as you see, there's that welded steel rod in the brace. I'm using that as a backing just to help me ensure that, if there was slippage, that it'll create a little bit more force there. This is what it looks like when it's all done. It's on. It's good to go. It's safe. All right, now we're going to go up to the upper thrust arm. And all of the suspension is 18s. You need sockets and box wrenches. The thrust arm does not have a backing. There's just a fitting in the back that has threading allowing this bolt to be secured. Go ahead and remove that, and at this point it's a good measure to update or upgrade your bushings and or thrust arms completely. I just upgraded my bushings with Power Flex Blacks. Alright, this is the actual control arm. You need an 18 socket and the box wrench. Just counter hold and loosen it up. Again, I'm showing one side, but this is going to be the same process for, in my case, the driver's side. Start with the passenger side. Right. You can use a hammer, the dead blow hammer here, to kind of give it a little whack to clear this tire rod boot or the steering rack boot. Thrust arm, you're going to need a 16 to hold the linkage, and then a 17 wrench and a 16 millimeter socket to counter hold the steering linkage. Alright, this is going to be your 21 wrench and a T40, T45 dependent. You can hold with the socket, but obviously a ratchet can maneuver, so I just hold the nut and use the ratchet to remove the tire rod. Before you fully remove both of these, ensure that your steering wheel is as straight as possible to minimize any really misalignment issues. You're going to need an alignment, but it'll help if you can at least drive semi-straight. All right, next, 12 millimeter bolts, studs, nuts, whatever, to hold on the bushing housing for the sway bar. So obviously both sides is removed of the linkage, and just remove that. The larger nut is obviously 21, the smaller one's a 19. These are banjo bolts, so ensure you have both of the washers. So it goes washer, fitting, banjo bolt, washer. If you don't have that, you're definitely going to have some leakage here, okay? So go ahead and drain all the fluid. It's a little bit of a mess. You can use those flexible funnels to try to mitigate it, but it is what it is. All right, next we have T14s and a 16 millimeter nut on top. Go ahead and hold the nut and remove the two bolts. There's two of them, and then your steering rack will be able to be removed. Ensure that your wheel is very straight here as you remove that knuckle on top that we removed before the brace. So I'm grabbing that now and I'm just pulling it off, and your steering rack will come out. Next I have a T30 with obviously a lot of extensions. This is to get the coolant passages that run along the side of the driver to the passenger or vice versa. So it's secured to the subframe. I get them from top, it's way easier. And then starting to stick a little ratchet on top. There's going to be 3 of them. 2 are very visible. The third one, as you'll see, you go to the power steering pump, find the pulley right behind the pulley, and you'll look down and there'll be a T30 that's apparent there. It's kind of hard to see in the video. Just go ahead and reach in there and grab it. Next, the V-brace or the jacking point. There's 16s, and there's 5 total bolts that run along the perimeter. Just follow those, remove them all. I did not show, but as you'll see, or I'm sure you already know, that there are little plastic skirts that cover the rearward-most nuts. That's a 10 and an 8, so go ahead and remove those as well. we're at the subframe. There's going to be 3 bolts. Again, I'm showing one side. Passenger side and the driver's side have different directions that they crack free. Go ahead and turn them at least a quarter to a half turn. They're 19 millimeters. And once they are cracked, the half or quarter turn, you can use an impact gun like I will use. I do have a jack with a piece of wood, as you can see behind me, bracing the subframe. So once all these bolts are loose, obviously one of this doesn't fall to the ground and create weird pressure on whatever bolt is still inside on some threading, and it allows me to drop it more securely. You can buy new bolts. I used them just when you buy them from BMW. They are E-Torx, which I don't necessarily care for, so I reused mine and just applied some medium strength thread locker. Just make sure you don't damage any of those power steering lines. All right, we're going to the downpipes now. This is going to be our first glimpse once this is gone at the turbos. So I crack free. I unplug these electrical connectors and ensure you know obviously which one is which, whether you're doing a single and or a upgraded twin or just replacing your twin turbos in general. All right, so there's 4 bolts and there's 113 on the V-band. Fully remove that. You can use an impact to make this easier. All right, once it's removed, pry it away. It might be stuck and stubborn, so you might need to use some kind of chisel type item and crack it free. I have the VRSF, I believe, 3-inch downpipes. They work great for what they were. It's time to upgrade. Just go ahead and just finagle it out. Boom. Definitely use new gaskets when it comes time to reinstall. That's one. And just repeat the process for the second one. I didn't mention it this first time, but I did crack each one of these loose while it's bolted up. This is just going to help in case this is your first time doing it or whatever. They could be a little bit stuck, and once you get it off, they'll really like heat weld it, and then good luck getting them off. So go ahead and remove both those nuts, fasteners, V-brace again. Like I said, some kind of pry tool in there. Ensure your V-brace comes off. Come on down. Boom. Could be a little bit of a struggle. All right, next we're going to remove the engine mount. There's 4 E-Torx bolts. It is fully, so the one I'm currently working is why I'm showing it, is going to be able to be loosened, but it's going to hit that motor mount. Okay, so there are 4 total, just kind of showing you. There's 1, 2, the third one's in the back, and then the 4th one I'm working on. I'm just loosening it till I can get it hand loose. When I mean it will not fully come free, as I mentioned, it will not come out of the housing. So the other ones will be able to be fully removed from the housing. This one will not. As you can see, we have access to our turbos for the first time. All right, boom. So the stock turbo uninstall, I'm kind of showing it this way. I feel like it's a little easier than trying to get the shots up on the engine block. So it's kind of a little recap. So obviously we're going to be back at the starting with the downpipes. This is kind of the setup you're going to see inside the car. I don't have the rear inlet there, but you get the idea. These are all the tools that you're going to need. Some sockets, some kind of cutting device to get that rear inlet. Otherwise, you want to take your engine out to remove it and keep it intact. All right, as we mentioned, loosen up oxygen sensors. It's the oxygen sensor tool or a 22 will work fine. That's what I use. Here's the oxygen sensor tool. So you can see it slides in the wire and then down onto the nut or the hex head. It's great, you know, angling could be an issue. So that's why I prefer 22. Anyone who's changed these obviously will know. All right, those are removed. Come in, and we're going into our V-brace again. So I showed you how to take out the downpipe, but this is just showing the whole setup of kind of what it will look like inside the car. So obviously our 13s, we remove those on both of them. Pop those out, pop the V-brace, motor mount. So obviously that's our starting point as you saw in the video. Remove the downpipes as currently shown, pop it, push it, and it'll come free. All right, there are gaskets inside these turbos here. You can see it on the other one, it's like a graphite one. All right, so I'm just showing you the heat shielding as well, the 4 eTorx bolts and where they run and how above the little exhaust flanges they are here. So you see all these bolts. Those are the bolts obviously you need to remove to loosen it. But right now, the heat shielding, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is where your boost solenoids are. As well as you can kind of see the vacuum diagrams that go into the wastegates. All right, so we're going into the water pipe. All right, that goes into the water pump. You have 2 secondary hoses and these heat shields behind the turbos, from the turbo to the block near the water pipes. All right, so all of these I believe are T30s. You're going to remove those first, and then those bolts. I have an automatic, unfortunately, so I have this secondary portion of piping that also feeds into the coolant. So for my car, and just in general, I remove all of your water pump and thermostat anyways, regardless whether you're changing it or you're not. All right, here's your inlet. The front inlet is going to be the same. There's the same bar with the 2 E30s that are stuck inside the self-containing nuts, so the nuts won't, or the bolts won't fall out. All right, as you can see, it's just attached to the front portion of the turbo, as well as the back, but the back one you're going to need to cut. All right, so here we go. This would be obviously attached to the front of the block near the Vanos solenoids roughly. Yeah, so Vanos solenoids right there, just follow that down. You'll see these 2 bolts. Go ahead and unbolt them. The bolt won't fully come out. They're in these stoppers here. I mean, mine came out all the way, but as you can see, the nut won't come out. So don't keep turning and turning to get the nut out. It's secured in this grommet. All right, next, once that's all done, follow this down. If you're trying to maintain it, you know, some people cut it, whatever, just pop it off. You're gonna have to wiggle it a little bit. There's a gasket inside here that kind of creates an airtight seal. Sometimes you can get charge codes here, and this can actually be the culprit, a leaking charge air to the turbo. Front one's obviously fairly easy to get to, the rear one's a little bit harder. So just go ahead and remove it, and then it's going to be a little bit of a finagling to get it out of the engine bay completely intact. But obviously I was able to do it, as will you. Just go ahead and pull it out and finagle it out of the engine bay. And that's out of the way. All right, and that's inside the turbo, and you can see the housing, and that's the wastegate. Alright, so for the rear one, as I mentioned, you're going to need to do some cutting unless you want to undo the bell housing and remove the engine from the car to create the clearance. Alright, so I use the inlet just as an example here, but it'd be reversed. The mounting bracket's going to be on top, which is going to be right in the back of the engine, right underneath the valve cover, and those bolts are going to be hard to get to. I got one out after much tribulation, and then I actually just cracked the other one. So as you see, whatever method you want, I use the Sawzall, but any saw you have, just cut it to where you feel comfortable down there, okay? And then it's going to obviously be split in half, and you're going to remove the one portion, this little snorkel to the turbo is going to be remaining, pull that off. All right, next I cut the wastegate lines, or pulled the wastegate lines. So in my case, I just cut them off from the solenoids. So this is routed in the solenoid into the boost vacuum containers. All right, so once that's all done, next you're going to have the charge pipe to the intercooler from the actual air from the turbos. So as you can see, there's these two V-bands that's holding onto the exhaust portion of the turbo, 6mm, I believe. And just go ahead and obviously loosen them up. They're going to be pretty tight. It should be a good clamping force. So get a pry bar in there or something and work it in to pop it open so you can push it off. Repeat that on both sides. As you can see here, and it's a good time to inspect all these gaskets and connections just in general to see the health of your turbos. Mine were fine. These are in perfect working order. I just wanted something else. All right, now this is the case where you start actually being able to remove the turbos from the vehicle. All right, like I said, we're going to remove these coolant ports and the water piping. All right, they're going to be these T30s. Hold on to these fasteners because you're going to need to reuse them, some of them, when it comes time to install the dock race fittings. All right, the heat shielding, that's the oil feeds. Okay, they're just two connections, and then there's a bolt. You're gonna have to really kind of get in there and pry that off. Have a towel or a little drip tray there to catch any oil that may come out on the block. And obviously, once these are out, this is a good time to ensure your block's nice and clean. All right, so once you get the two bolts off the bottom, you're going to just slide it out. Obviously, it's going to have a little more pressure. But you're going to remove these two heat shieldings. All right, now, as you can see, there's a lot more room. All right, you're going to follow that coolant port up to the back of the block, and this is going to be one of the block huff portions for your new turbo. Or if you're doing your twin turbo upgrades or whatever, obviously that's the coolant port. So this is the front coolant port. Goes to the front of the block. Just follow it up, undo the nut, and these require a little bit of pressure. They're in there. There's a good seal, so do not be surprised if you need to apply some force to remove them. All right, once those two are removed, obviously now we're going to finally get to this water pipe. Remove all the nuts. As you can see, there's plenty of exposure now as opposed to before. Just pop them out. Nice. Again, these could be a little tricky. Should be a good seal. All right, the 4 bolts, go ahead, undo those T30s, and remove the water pipe. So essentially all that's left is your turbos, and I left the heat shielding. You can remove it, or you can remove it afterwards. Up to you. All right, with all these connections loose, there you go. Those are the turbos. Okay, now these are the 2 dumps. So that's dump 1, which is going to end up being your freeze port if you decide to go single turbo. So the rear is going to be blocked off. I know the Motive kit, they block off the front, but this one, at least the dock race kit, utilizes the front turbo dump to continue. Your T11 external for the copper bolts, they just slide over. There's a T50, I believe, internal as well you can use. Mine came off fine. You can obviously heat them up a little bit to kind of facilitate the nuts. I didn't have any studs remain in the vehicle, but at the same time, I did have extra new studs that I pulled out and replaced. Okay, so once all of those are removed, the only thing holding in the turbo is nothing. So obviously do one turbo at a time. All those lines are free. Double, triple check, and then you should be able to just go ahead and pull and wiggle this off the block. Okay. Check to make sure the gaskets came with it. There'll be 6 total donut gaskets. They're aluminum, so be careful. And that's it. Now you're heat shielding. So these are the e-torques that we talked about earlier that run along the side or right underneath the valve cover. Okay, so just go ahead and remove those. You have clear access to them at this point. You can do it at any point you wish. And pull it off. And now, as you can see, you're going to have a block that will look like this. And that's where all of your ports are located. Enjoy. Consider subscribing, like the video, and thanks for tuning in to Speed Theory Performance.